Recording has started.
Perfect. So hello and welcome again. So my name is Petr Knoth. I will say a few words before we begin. So first of all, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be publicly available shortly after the end of the meeting. So we'll send you a direct link to the recording. If you want to, of course, you can share it with your colleagues. The recording will be also available on our website and on our social media. The second thing is that if you want to ask questions to our presenters, please use chat below. We will have some time at the end of the webinar. So after all sessions, after all presentations, we'll have like 15 minutes for the dedicated Q&A session. And last thing, maybe let's introduce you to our speakers. So Morane Gruenpeter from the INRIA and the Software Heritage, David Pride from the Open University, and Petr Knoth also from the Open University, the principal investigator of the SoFAIR project. We're good to go, so maybe let's begin. Petr, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Patrick. I'm humbled to be here today with every one of you and to be able to deliver this webinar to you together with my amazing colleagues, Morane and David. My name is Petr Knoth. I'm a professor of data science at the Open University. I also happen to be the head of core, one of the key infrastructures which are participating in this project. What SoFAIR is SoFAIR stands for making software fair, and so today we're going to be talking very much about research software, what are its intricacies, and how to make software discoverable, basically, and linked to publications. So let me go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about why this is important. We're very much there are several reasons, but one of the key reasons why we should take better care of software, of research software assets, is because of the reproducibility crisis. So in 2016, there was a well-known study by Baker that interviewed basically more than 1,500 scientists. And basically the whole study was about reproducibility. And it has been revealed that more than 70% of researchers have tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. What is even more interesting is actually that more than 50% have failed to reproduce even their own experiments. And so this really led to lots of discussions within academia. Some people started saying that there is a reproducibility crisis. And indeed, people also, and this study also looks into what might be the reasons for this reproducibility and what can we do to actually mitigate this and make the situation better. And so there are many different options that we can do, but one of the leading problems that has been mentioned by the people interviewed in this study is that actually in many cases it is very hard to even find where the research software basically is. So how can one reproduce a research experiment if we cannot even locate and identify the source code that was used during the study? And that is in fact what the problem that our project SoFAIR tries to solve. So we are basically coming here from the perspective that software assets need to be possible to identify, and we need to be able to actually start investigating reproducibility. It's completely a precondition for solving the reproducibility crisis. And in fact, when I joined academia, when I started to be an academic, I was really surprised how hard for me it was to actually locate software assets for the sort of papers that I started reading. And I would encourage everyone who doesn't believe that this is difficult to actually go and read a couple of research manuscripts and then try to find the software. It really is indeed very difficult for the vast majority of documents. So the key issue that is hindering discoverability, attribution, and reusability of software, and sorry, I forgot to move the slide, is the fact that the existence of the software asset actually remains hidden within the manuscript of the research papers. And what we feel we need to do is that, all of us, we find it very, very natural that when a paper is published, then it gets a persistent identifier, it is well recognized, it gets cited, and so on. But we don't necessarily, at this point, we don't yet treat research software assets in exactly the same way. And what we would like to do is basically to elevate research assets to the same level as the level with which we treat publications. So just to tell you a little bit more about the SoFAIR project, it's a 2-year international Čistira project with the participation of 4 countries, the United Kingdom, France, the Czech Republic, and Poland. We have 6 partners listed on the slide, basically, and that's basically all you need to know at this point. We're 1 year through, and the next year, or the 2025, is the last year of the project, and we'd like to be finished by the end of December. Let me just tell you a little bit about what this webinar is about. This webinar is to tell you, and the objective of this webinar is really to tell you more about what we envisage and what we call the SoFAIR workflow. What is a workflow? So a workflow is basically an orchestration of components. It's a procedure basically that can happen and that should help with a number of actors that interact with each other, and basically with the goal of elevating with the goal of solving this problem. So the SoFAIR workflow shows how stakeholders, tools, and infrastructures work in combination. An author can deposit a piece of research software in a code repository, which is indicated here by number 1. Then the research paper is then harvested from the repository by, for instance, core, and software mentions extracted from the paper, from the full text of the research paper, can be extracted using basically machine learning tools. So a software mention here is effectively the textual description within the manuscript of the document, which sort of clearly identifies that a particular type of software was used during the study. It might name the software. In some circumstances, it might not even name it, but it might just basically mention and make it very clear that there is some software behind it. So this happens in number 3. In number 4, we send something which we call an authorization or a validation request to a manager, and that is routed via the repository to the author. In number 6, we then basically have a validated, author-validated asset, software asset. We know that a particular research paper introduced a particular research asset now, and then we therefore send a request to Software Heritage, which is a well-known archive of software assets, basically. And Software Heritage responds by issuing a persistent identifier and by archiving the asset. Now, I introduced you to this workflow in a really big, in a sort of high-level nutshell, and we're now going to look together into each individual steps of the workflow. And I will use my colleagues to do that. So the agenda for the rest of the remainder of the webinar is that I'm now going to hand over to Morane. She's going to tell you more about the workflow and about how we documented it, and also about how we about how you can get involved basically with giving us feedback on the workflow. David is then going to talk about machine learning models and the software extraction and the integration with core. And then it's going to be back to Morane, who will tell you more about Software Heritage, and I will finally conclude. So handing over to Morane now.
Thank you, Petr, for this inspiring introduction, seeing the overall project and why we do need that. And I'm going to move forward to go into the detail of the steps of the workflow, because this is the idea of this webinar, is to go into the engine, to the technical parts. First, we're looking into the manuscript deposited in an open access repository, and the fact that many researchers are also working in forgers, in code repositories, and mention their software, the software developed to produce the articles in their article. So you have this one on the right for the code repository and the 2 downwards towards the open access repository. All of that is specifically described in the SoFAIR documentation repository that you can find the link on the slide, but I'm going to put the link just after in the chat, so you can go and look at the specific steps and how an infrastructure can implement this same workflow for their infrastructure. Here also a more detailed mermaid sequence diagram where we see the interactions between the different actors. So I've just described those two steps, but the two steps are on very high level, as Petr said, when we look at the diagram, and we need to really analyze what's behind that. So I'm moving towards the other part of this large diagram, but I'm not going to enter the details now because we will walk you through each one of these steps with our presentation. So I'm moving to David now and giving him the hand.
I'm just turning everything on. Bear with me. There's my camera. Fantastic. It picked it up. Okay. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, as I should say now for most of you. Hi, I'm David. I was introduced earlier. I'm one of the researchers here at Core. I've been with the Core team for about eight, nearly 9 years now. My goodness. And I'm going to talk about what we do at Core in terms of what Core is to start with, and then in terms of how we're working within the SoFAIR project. So Core, some of you may not have heard of us. We're actually an open access index and aggregator of open access repositories from across the global scholarly landscape. We index content from about currently 12,500 repositories. We're used by over 30 million people a month. We're hosted at the Open University. We're a not-for-profit open access infrastructure. We're a signatory to the principles of open access scholarly infrastructures, and you can find those online. And we provide solutions and we build solutions for the academic and scholarly community on top of the data that we aggregate. Just a few brief numbers about the Core. Core has grown incredibly in the near 12 years it's been around. Let's say we now have over 12,000 data providers, and we link to hundreds of millions of free-to-read text. But we also have over 30 million, over 35 million now full-text research papers actually hosted by Core itself. And this is where the research side comes into it. And this is the bit that I get excited about, because it allows us to do some really cool things with that corpus of literature. And one of the things that we're doing is allows us is this, as Petr and Morane have just described, is extracting what's referred to as a software mention, which is literally a sentence within a full text research paper that says, during this piece of research, we either used or we introduced or we created or developed a piece of research software. And it's when software is created or developed as part of a research project, it's actually part of it is making sure the authors get the attribution and get the credit for developing that research. But finding things within full text research paper is computationally expensive and takes a lot of work. So a lot of work we're doing in the background is working out how we can best extract these software mentions. And there are libraries around for doing this. We're working with a very well-known one at the moment called Softcite, and we're also testing other models, large language models as well at the moment, as you'll see, in terms of how to best identify and extract these software mentions from full text research papers. In fact, this is quite a topic at the moment. There was an entire shared task that was held at a computer science conference last year with many teams competing to try and develop models for these types of extractions. So we're working on numerous models at the moment, and once we have these models developed, we will then implement these as part of this SoFAIR workflow. We also need to look around how these models can scale, the cost associated with these models. So this is still very much an ongoing part of the work. We have some good results to start with. We will continue to improve these, and when we have the models ready, we will move forwards to the integration of those models into the SoFAIR workflow. So you can see here, here we're talking about, this is the models themselves. And then if we move forward, and this is what Morane was talking to in the documents, was how we can then validate that what's been extracted by the model is actually true and accurate, because machine learning models aren't 100% accurate. So we're not going to send out validations that haven't been validated, and we think this is an intrinsic step by the authors of the research paper. And the way that this will be done is through what's known as the core dashboard. Now, core provides its dashboard services to its 12,500 data providers who can log in. The example screen you see here is from the Open University. It's ORO, it's Open Research Online. And the dashboard provides a range of different modules for repository managers to manage access to their content, improve its discoverability, look at their OA compliance, their DOI coverage, etc. It's a powerful tool, but it gives us here the ability to add additional modules to this dashboard, to the existing dashboard. And we're looking at the integration of the extracted software mentions into the repository dashboard. So if you imagine a repository has n thousand papers or 100 papers, and the dashboard gives the repository manager the ability to manage these papers. And in terms of software mentions, the way we envisage this working is the manager will be presented with a list of software mentions that have been extracted from papers hosted by that repository. So it will give you an analysis of all the papers that we believe have software mentions in there. As I said, the model may not be 100% accurate, so a confidence score is provided, and the repository managers can then manage and disseminate these requests very simply to their authors through the core dashboard system. And on the right here, you can see here's an example of an email that can be triggered by the repository manager, and it lists the paper that the software was mentioned in. It includes the actual, what we call the contents, the mentioned context, which is where in the paper the specific software was mentioned. It mentions the name of the software, and again, it gives a confidence score as to how confident we are that this is a correct mention. They say we're getting very high confidence scores. The author can then accept it, say, yes, thank you very much. This is my software. I have introduced this. This is the correct paper. They can edit it, or they can actually say, no, sorry, in this case, it was a mistake. But overall, we're getting very good confidence scores and good confidence results. And by using this platform, the repository managers can manage with their authors to confirm all of these mentions that have been extracted from papers, therefore ensuring that the authors of those papers and the author of the software actually get correct attribution. And that's a critical part of this project. One of the things, this is slightly more technical in the background, is how this actually operates in the background. And to do this, we're building on an existing protocol that was built as part of the Confederation of Open Access Repositories. There's a link down there below. Please do take a copy of the link. I think all of these slides will be available after the presentation, so if you don't get it, don't worry about it. And their Notify protocol is a sort of interoperable and two-way method for linking actors in this case. And I'm going to hand you back to Morane in a second, because Morane's going to tell you about the next bit. So which is, when we have identified the paper, we can use this communication protocol to communicate with the repository. The repository can use it to communicate with the author, and then the repository can also use it to communicate with software heritage, which will then receive the validated asset and can then start the procedure of issuing IDs for the asset, making sure the asset is archived within software heritage. And I think at that point, to talk about the registration and those parts, I'll hand you back to Morane.
Thank you, David. That was very interesting to see how the internals behind the scenes is happening. And I'm going to move forward to the part where software heritage comes into play. First, I'm taking the hand as a presenter on the slides. Yes. And I'm very happy to share about software heritage, because maybe you don't know why it's so important to archive software, and the assets, the links between the articles and the software are also crucial, because they are the metadata describing the software. Now, software source code is fragile. It can disappear. And thankfully, we have software heritage to collect, preserve, and share all software source code. Now, there's no date to the numbers on this slide, and I feel like I've been doing a very big misstep of copying another slide from way back. So I think the numbers are quite higher today, and much more than 240 million projects and much more than 15 billion source code files. Maybe someone here can go check and put in the chat what are the numbers today, or even just link the archive.softwareheritage.org so we can profit from that. At Software Heritage, we have the deposit feature to connect between infrastructure, and we have already a lot of submissions from different infrastructure. We are crawling the web to get all the software source code out there, and there is a save code now feature so that we can save any code. And I think that's my next slide for you all to know that you can save any code now with this feature. It's there's a web UI interface, but we also have a webhook endpoint and a browser extension. And in SoFAIR, one of the things that are important is to identify these URLs, see if they are in Software Heritage, and even if they are not in Software Heritage, go and save them. Now, the part of the deposit which is integrated also in the workflow that we are imagining on giving metadata on software in Software Heritage is based on a success story between HAL software and Software Heritage, where a researcher is depositing code, not articles, into HAL. That's just a kind of a side story to the SoFAIR project. Now, why do we need metadata? Metadata is here to describe software, and we have identified a few years ago the code meta vocabulary, which is a subset of schema.org, around which there is an academic community discussing software metadata and a crosswalk table to map different vocabularies. And this metadata is indexed in Software Heritage, and we do have this vision where researchers have their metadata in their code repository, which is indexed in Software Heritage, then can be taken into other infrastructure like HAL, and also be useful for workflows that link articles and software with the SoFAIR workflow. And so to deposit this metadata or deposit the software, we have first implemented in 2017 the SWORD v2 protocol, which is in XML format, where we can when infrastructure drop into Software Heritage deposits. Additionally to this deposit from 2017, we have added the metadata only deposit, where only metadata, like the name says, could be deposited in Software Heritage, mentioning a SWID, so a software hash identifier. I'll get to that in a minute, or a URL. And this is the protocol we use when submissions come from HAL, Zenodo, or other infrastructure to deposit software. And we have the sort client and a deposit API, a deposit database, and all of that integrates the code into the main archive, which is immense Merkle DAG. Now, we need something maybe different for SoFAIR, and we ask ourselves, can we use code meta in the SoFAIR workflow? I'm putting in this slide an example of how metadata is transferred into Software Heritage using the code meta vocabulary. And then I'm asking a question, is describing the software the same as describing the mention, the relationship between the article and the software. And that's where we go into the metadata that we need for the SoFAIR workflow. What do we want to identify? We need to identify the paper, and we have this reference publication, and maybe use this type of properties like the paper title, the author name, the author email, and we need some other attributes about the mentioned context and code repository. Have you encountered a vocabulary for software mentions? That is something that I'm asking you here, and maybe in the discussion I can't see because I've I hid the bar, and I will look at it later. If you have encountered this type of vocabulary, we're very interested to know that. Now, our next step in terms of the roadmap that we envision through SoFAIR, through this workflow, is to move towards the core notify that you have already heard David describe. And this is a preliminary sequence diagram showing the interaction between a repository inbox, a review service inbox, and a software heritage inbox to get the mention, and at the same time archive this metadata in our metadata storage and generate a suite, because maybe the mention mentions just a URL and there's no identifier, and we need to see which identifier is best to describe this particular mention, to give back for this mention. And so there will be a save mechanism that will go and fetch the content into software heritage with the save code now API endpoint, and link and give back an identifier and hold an identifier, a software hash identifier. And I'm going to end this archival bit with a software hash identifier. So for those of you who do not know the software hash ID, it's an intrinsic identifier computed from the object itself. So we have a collection of suites for a software project, because we have many revisions, we have many directories and files, and this is important to note. It is a decentralized identifier, so you don't need a registry. It's just an agreement on a standard. Everybody can compute a suite on their machine, and it is a cryptographically strong identifier. Now, to conclude this part, what we want to see at the end is this suite on the open access repository. While seeing a metadata record for an article, the supplementary material or the references or citation showing the relationship using suites, which are permanent persistent identifiers, having better visibility of software outputs in open access repository, and improving discoverability, increasing the long-term archival, ensuring that it is here for the long term, and finally recognizing software mention as first-class bibliographic records, and improving the citation of software. And with that, I'm going to give the conclusion to Petr.
Thank you so much, both Morane and David, for providing a detailed overview of the SoFAIR workflow. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to get this back a little bit to the high level. So what we really tried to communicate to you today was to explain the importance of the management of research software assets, basically as part of or within our open scholarly infrastructures. You have seen effectively that we used as part of SoFAIR, we really built on services that are part of the open scholarly infrastructures network. Basically, it's services that are typically dedicated to the principles of open scholarly infrastructure policy, and we feel very strongly about the need to develop, improve, and sustain these kinds of scholarly infrastructures in the hands of academia. I think in particular here we highlight, of course, the need for better management of software assets, and the importance of the management of software assets comes primarily from two important perspectives. The first one is effectively dealing with the reproducibility crisis. And the second one is very much about credit, assigning credit to the creators of software, so that these people who are participating in research software creation can be rewarded and can be effectively, potentially, they could use it in promotion cases and so on. Because more and more the needs of the contributions of effectively developers in research processes is definitely growing, and is going to continue growing for the next few years, or actually many years probably. The second thing that we've done in this, or we attempted to do, was basically to tell you more about how the SoFAIR workflow operates, basically. So we told you about the components that are part of this process, which starts with effectively the deposit of a particular paper into an institutional repository, and then of course it's followed by automatic extraction of the software mentions from the manuscripts to a validation request, which is sent back to the author. So effectively, we are keeping the author involved, and all the way to the registration and automatic archival of the asset. So we explained to you how these components sort of work together, and you might have noticed that our approach effectively follows the idea that the orchestration is always based on open protocols. So for instance, for the indexing and harvesting, we reuse OAI PMH. For the validation requests, we use the core notify protocols. And what we also do is that we document all these orchestrations, effectively the messages which are sent between these systems and services, using we document that basically in the software workflow documentation, which means that if core didn't exist, or software heritage didn't exist, and we hope this for many, many years on, but if they didn't, then there would be a possibility for a new entrant basically into this space, who would be again able to build on these open protocols. So we're doing it not just for ourselves, basically. We're not necessarily putting SoFAIR and software heritage and core here in the center for no reason, basically. We're really doing it for the community, so that the community has a solution to this really, really important problem. You can get involved in the orchestration of the components. This is one of the key reasons why we're doing this webinar. So we're inviting you to go to the SoFAIR documentation, and you can comment and you can feedback, and it might be the case that you tell us, you give us some suggestions on how we can revise these protocols so that they can be even more effective, for instance, and they could serve a larger group of repositories and so forth. So we definitely would love to keep you involved. Also, if you're a repository manager, we are building services. We are building here a service for repository managers that could help them to effectively, that could help their institution to do a better job, basically here, and it could have many sort of positive impacts. So if you are a repository manager, we would really love to stay in touch with you. We would love if towards the end of the project you would be maybe interested in trialing the components that we are developing here. We will basically develop the service basically for the authorization of the requests for a specific repository platform, so that it's something that can be scaled out. We are not really building it for one repository or two repositories. We'd love to build it so that it could be scaled out for many, many repositories. So that's all sort of from me, wrapping it up. Thank you so much for your participation in this webinar, and thank you very much to my colleagues, and thank you to the whole SoFAIR team. Basically, has been working really hard on this, and I would like to, with this, open for questions.
Thank you, Petr. I don't see any questions in the chat. Maybe some people are thinking about the questions.
Indeed, let's give people time. And also, if you feel that there are any sort of needs for clarifications, then we can clarify specific aspects of the workflow or of the infrastructures.
I can see several people typing in the chat right now. They're all overlaid with each other at the moment, so I think there's some. Morane, one for you.
Should I read it? Because I think.
Can you see the question? Would you like me to read out? We have it
Yeah.
in the chat saying she's a little bit confused about how to match a software mention with a SWID. But she says she might not know software heritage. So did you want to talk a little bit to that?
Sure, absolutely. The mention itself. So first, we would love to have mentions with SWIDs in articles. That's the first given, because we would like researchers to know that the SWID exists. And some researchers already use the SWID in their articles, and they would be very, very easy to identify. So if there is a SWID in an article, I think this is one of the easiest cases to connect a software asset with an article. But the idea of the workflow is to identify from the mention, and sometimes the mentions are really hard to work with. They are not URLs. So the SWID is the easiest, then the URL would be the second best, because then we have a place where we might find the software, and we could archive this code repository, for example, and then generate. In terms of SWID, when we archive the software, we have the full tree of the software, the directories and the revisions are then computed with a SWID, and the SWID of the version or snapshot would be then returned with the mention and can be added to the article. So it's kind of, we give you the SWID, we find the mention and we give you the SWID. Now the most difficult mentions are the ones where we have we need to do some disambiguation. We don't know which is the URL, if this is this software or another, this version or another. So those questions are still very open, and we are working on that. And maybe I can, with this comment, I can move to some of our other panelists. Maybe David, you want to say a word on the difficulty of identifying or understanding a mention.
So did you want me to come in on that one, Petr?
Go ahead, and then I might add a couple of things.
Because we have a follow-up question from Huinio. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Is saying, would like to know what's the role of Grobid in the SoFAIR architecture, and if the software mentions ML models are based on the Grobid Softcite software mentions. Now, as I alluded to during my part of the presentation, that Grobid, for those of you who don't know, is a very, very well known and well used and well loved library for extracting text from PDF files into structured XML documents, which can then be tagged and used. And you're absolutely correct that Softcite uses Grobid in its initial stages to do the transfer from the PDF file into the XML file that is then used for the machine learning libraries. Now, Softcite, as you're absolutely correct, by the inimitable Patrice Lopez, who is in fact part of this project, was developed several years ago and is based on a data set of annotations. However, the annotations for that data set only came from two domains, which I believe were economics and bioscience. A big part of this project that we're working on that we haven't discussed today, because we've got I think a whole nother webinar coming up about that later this year, is on the work we're doing at the moment, which is on producing a new annotations of data for software mentions from across a range of 17 domains. And this is all to improve the functionality and the efficacy, not only of Softcite, but also of the models that we've been testing with. Hopefully that's answered your question. And while I've been saying that, there's several other questions are now popping up.
Yeah, I'd like to just maybe to this. One of the key challenges here. So what we're doing as part of the project is we take Softcite basically as something that we had at the beginning as a state of the art basically, and we're trying to build even better models on top of that basically. So we're starting from there as a typical research project. We're trying to improve, but as part of we're not only chasing performance. in a sense that not only accuracy-like performance. We're actually here also facing a big challenge because we need to be able to apply this on a very large number of publications. We understand that, you know, it's not possible at this point in time for individual repositories to run large language models, basically, you know, that they just don't have the resources, the machines that are supporting repositories don't offer that. And this is why we're sort of doing it at the sort of aggregator level. But that also means that we have maybe per year, we, you know, in core, we get about 10 million new papers, basically. So how do you process 10 million new papers and extract software mentions from all of these? This is at the moment really, really challenging. We're sort of facing significant limitations, basically, to what we can do, and we're also seeing the financial cost and burden, basically, which gets associated with it. So trying to come up with models that are effectively, you know, that can sort of find a good trade-off between performance and effectively the sort of speed and scalability are of an important essence to us.
If I can just come back in here, there's a continuing conversation with an interesting point from Violan that we've just replied to. This is probably a question for Morane here. Pierre has put in an interesting question here saying, I guess that you will eventually create a software catalog from all of the mentions that you have. That sounds very much like what Software Heritage is doing. Could domain experts then review, correct, or update a specific piece of software once it's been registered?
That's a very good idea. I don't know if it will be possible, but it's a good idea to have domain expert review and correct specific software. And I don't know if on the core side, after you do find the mentions and before communicating with the authors, if there is envisioned a step where domain experts can integrate into this loop.
So let me come to that, Morane. This is actually a really good point. So indeed, I think the overall assumption, basically, of the SoFAIR project has always been that the author needs to be somehow involved. We, you know, really, really understand that it cannot be done without the participation of the author because the AI technology will make mistakes, basically. So we need the validation step. Also, we are fully aware of the fact that without the AI, it's not scalable because people will just not report the software, they just won't do it, basically. So what we're doing at the moment is that when the software mention gets identified, we sort of route it via the repository manager to the author, and the author will have the option to say, I agree with what got extracted, or I want to edit it. So they will be able indeed to sort of make, to say, yes, you extracted it, but you're missing a version. Because, for instance, in the manuscripts, it's very common that it might mention the kind of software that was used, but we don't know what version was used. We don't know from when. We are missing relatively important metadata that would actually determine, for instance, which SWID this particular software belongs to, because there will be different persistent identifiers, different SWIDs for different versions of the same software. So the involvement of the author is important, and that's why we're building these sort of tools for the repositories. And sorry, because David, I think we missed the question from Violet, which is exactly going in that direction, and it's about the French Committee for Open Science that is currently working on a catalog of software from our laboratories, and she's particularly interested in the link between our work and this catalog. So what I would say is, indeed, this is a really interesting connection. I would totally encourage you that maybe I would love to have a meeting with you, basically, to talk about how we could work maybe together, because this is something that we would love to support. You know, we could basically somehow automate or semi-automate this process, and I'd like to see and explore how this could be handled.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Petr. I actually responded to Violaine in the thing, and we've contacted. I've given her my email address, and we're going to catch up. And I'm just replying to an extended question from Pierre in the chat about the models that we're using. So I will just finish this, and everybody will be.
Maybe we should read out loud the question by Pierre, because
Pierre put an interesting question. Is it regarding the models that we're using that we looked at and the results we present is might be too big and not adapted for the task? Did we try with encoder only smaller models like BERT, Modern BERT or Gleiner that are well certified named entity recognition? And I've just put my response in there, and it's like, yeah, absolutely, you're absolutely correct there, Pierre. And in fact, we're using the Softcite, which is based on SciBERT, and we're using SciBERT as the baseline comparative there. And the results we showed you there at the moment were actually just literally the vanilla models. So that was just zero shot. The other directions we also want to look at is comparing the SciBERT type model with the LLM models on a zero shot setup, and also on few shot, and also with some in context learning. Lots of people are now typing again in the chat. No problems. Thanks, Pierre.
I just added that for questions after the webinar, since we are going to end soon, we have the documentation online. It's a GitHub repository, so please use issues if you want to ask other questions to us following this webinar. So if you're watching the recording, or if you just had another question, that's a good place to find us and get an answer.
Just be so I mean, on behalf of the SoFAIR team, I would really like to thank everyone who participated to this webinar. If you have any more questions, then feel free to really reach out to us, and we'd be super happy to set up meetings or any sort of engagements to have with you. But Patrick, I think we should hand over to you to maybe wrap it up, if you'd like to.
Yep. So I think we can finish here. I hope we'll upload the recording to the webinar today, and we'll share with you via email and also via our website. And that will be it, basically. So yeah, if you have any other questions, please follow the link that Morane put it inside of the chat. And yeah, thank you so much for you and for our presenters. And we are open to your questions, and I hope we see each other later on.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.